Aaliyah Johnson was just 16 years old, and this was her first time flying alone. Her mom and dad stood with her at the busy Atlanta airport, hugging her tightly and giving her 100 reminders. "Call us when you land," her mom kept saying, smoothing Aaliyah's hair with gentle hands. Her dad carried her suitcase and kept asking if she had her boarding pass, her ID, and snacks. They both looked proud but nervous, as if they couldn't decide whether to let go or hold on. A little longer. But Aaliyah smiled, hiding her own nerves, and said, "I'll be fine. It's just a plane ride to Grandma's." Deep down, she hoped she was right. Aaliyah loved visiting her grandma in Chicago. Her grandmother lived in a small apartment, always smelling like cinnamon and warm bread. But this trip felt different. It was her first big adventure alone, and she wanted to show her parents she was growing up. She checked her seat number again, 18A, a window seat. Perfect for watching the world shrink below the clouds. The airport was loud and crowded. People hurried everywhere, some dragging suitcases, some saying goodbye with teary hugs, others already lost in their phones or business calls. Aaliyah watched everything. She was always curious about the world around her, and her uncle, who worked as an airplane mechanic, had taught her to pay attention to little details. "You never know what you'll learn just by looking," he often told her. When it was time to board, Aaliyah got in line with the other passengers. She noticed a family with young kids, a group of businessmen in suits, and an elderly lady who struggled with her bag. Without thinking, Aaliyah offered to help the lady lift her suitcase into the overhead bin. The lady smiled and thanked her, and Aaliyah felt a little less nervous. She found her seat by the window and settled in. The seat was soft, and she pressed her face to the glass, watching as ground crew loaded bags into the plane. Her seatmate, an older man in a blue sweater, nodded politely and smiled. Across the aisle was a friendly flight attendant named Ms. Jenkins, who greeted each passenger with a kind word and a warm smile. As the plane filled up, Aaliyah took out her favorite book, a mystery novel her uncle had given her, but she didn't open it right away. Instead, she watched as people found their seats and put away their things. The cabin was filled with all sorts of people, young and old, quiet and loud, excited and tired. The pilot's voice came over the speakers, cheerful and confident, welcoming everyone and explaining the flight would be about 2 hours. Aaliyah felt her heartbeat quicken as the plane began to move, slowly rolling toward the runway. Before takeoff, the flight attendants started the safety demonstration. Most people barely paid attention, busy with their phones or chatting.
Aaliyah
Listened closely. She watched how the seatbelt worked, how to use the oxygen mask, and where the emergency exits were. She even counted the rows from her seat to the nearest exit, just like her uncle had taught her. "Always be prepared, even if you never need it," he'd said. The engines roared to life, and soon the plane was speeding down the runway. Aaliyah gripped her armrests, feeling the sudden push as the plane lifted off the ground. Her stomach fluttered with excitement and nerves. She looked out the window and watched the city grow smaller, the roads and buildings turning into tiny shapes below the clouds. Once in the air, the plane leveled out, and the captain announced they could unbuckle their seatbelts. Miss Jenkins came down the aisle with a cart of drinks and snacks. She stopped at Aaliyah's row, offering her a juice and a bag of pretzels. "First time flying alone?" Miss Jenkins asked. Seeing the look on Aaliyah's face, Aaliyah nodded. "But my uncle works on airplanes, so I know a lot about how they work." Ms. Jenkins smiled. "That's good. It's always nice to know what's going on." Aaliyah relaxed a little, sipping her juice and looking out at the clouds. She opened her book and read for a while, losing herself in the story. Every now and then, she'd glance at the people around her. The old man next to her was doing a crossword puzzle, and a little girl across the aisle was coloring quietly. For a while, everything was peaceful. Aaliyah thought about her uncle, who would always explain things to her, how jet engines worked, why planes could fly, what all the buttons in a cockpit meant. She remembered the time he took her to the airport for a tour, showing her the inside of an old plane and letting her press a few buttons, not the important ones. He joked, Aaliyah liked to imagine herself as an explorer or a detective, always solving puzzles and noticing things other people missed. That's why she watched the cabin crew, the flickering seatbelt signs, the blinking lights on the ceiling. She liked learning and always wanted to be ready for anything, even though most flights were perfectly safe. As the plane flew on, Aaliyah felt her nerves settle. She thought about what she'd do first when she reached her grandma's place. It's probably eat warm cookies and tell stories until bedtime. The idea made her smile. Suddenly, the plane hit a patch of turbulence. It wasn't much, just a little. Bump, but some passengers gasped. Leah remembered her uncle's words. It's just air currents, nothing to worry about. She sat back, feeling brave. She closed her eyes for a moment and let herself dream of what she might do when she grew up. Maybe she'd be an engineer or even a pilot. She liked the idea of helping people and being in control, just like the heroes in her favorite books. As the sun started to set outside her window, painting the sky orange and pink, Aaliyah felt proud of herself. She was on her own, facing the world, and doing just fine. She didn't know that soon she would face something much bigger than she had ever imagined. For now, she was just a passenger. But that was about to change, in those quiet moments. As the plane hummed through the sky and the passengers relaxed, Aaliyah had no idea that she was about to become the most important person on that flight. She didn't know that everything she had learned and every detail she had noticed would matter in ways no one could have guessed. But for now, as the lights dimmed and Ms. Jenkins walked the aisle checking on everyone, Aaliyah was content. Watched the clouds drift by and thought about how sometimes ordinary days could become extraordinary without warning. And she was right, because soon everything would change and Aaliyah would discover just how brave and capable she truly was. Aaliyah felt herself drifting into a light sleep as the plane glided smoothly through the sky. The gentle hum of the engines was almost comforting, and the other passengers were quietly reading, watching movies, or softly talking. Outside her window, the sun was halfway below the clouds, creating a golden stripe across the sky. For a while, it seemed like everything was perfect. Then, out of nowhere, there was a loud, strange sound, a kind of shuddering groan that echoed through the plane. Aaliyah's eyes shot open as the plane shook, not just a little bump this time, but a sharp, jerky movement. The lights flickered, and the peaceful silence in the cabin turned into nervous whispers. Before anyone could say much, the oxygen masks dropped from the panel above. They swung back and forth in front of every passenger's face, and a few people screamed in shock. The little girl across the aisle started crying, and the elderly man next to Aaliyah gripped his armrest so tightly his knuckles turned white. Aaliyah felt fear bubbling up inside her, but she remembered her uncle's words. When things go wrong, stay calm and watch. Panic never helps. She took a deep breath and pulled the oxygen mask over her mouth and nose, just like the safety video showed. The captain's voice came on the intercom, but this time it didn't sound confident or cheerful. His voice was shaky, almost hard to hear, as he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. We are experiencing a technical issue. Follow the crew's instructions and keep your masks on. We'll update you soon." A flight attendant rushed down the aisle, checking on everyone and making sure the masks were on properly. Ms. Jenkins, the same flight attendant who had smiled so kindly earlier, moved quickly but tried to stay calm for the passengers. She gave Aaliyah a small, reassuring nod as she passed. Aaliyah looked around and realized how scared everyone was. The little girl's mother was trying to comfort her daughter, whispering softly. A businessman was clutching his briefcase like it was a life jacket. Even Ms. Jenkins looked worried, even though she was trying to hide it. The plane jolted again, shaking more than before. The lights went out for a moment, plunging the cabin into darkness. People gasped, and some shouted for help. Then the emergency lights switched on, bathing everything in a strange red glow. Suddenly, the co-pilot came running down the aisle, calling for a doctor. People turned and stared. He stopped near Aaliyah's row, his face pale and sweating. "Is anyone here a doctor?" he asked, desperation in his voice. The old man next to Aaliyah raised his hand and said he was a retired doctor. The co-pilot quickly led him to the front. For a few minutes, everything was tense and uncertain. People whispered, Some cried, and others just stared straight ahead. Aaliyah tried to focus on her breathing, counting to 10 slowly in her head. She remembered what her uncle had said about emergencies. If you can keep your mind clear, you'll see what others miss. The captain's voice came back weaker this time. We're working on the problem. Please remain seated. Then, the intercom cut off, replaced by static. Ms. Jenkins came by again, kneeling beside a woman who looked like she might faint. Just breathe slowly, she said softly, holding the woman's hand. She moved on to Aaliyah, checking her mask. Are you okay? She asked. Aaliyah nodded, though her heart was pounding. What's happening? She whispered. Ms. Jenkins looked at her with worried eyes, but tried to smile. We're having a technical issue, but the crew is trained for emergencies. Try to stay. .com. Just then, the old doctor came back from the front, looking shaken. He sat down heavily and wiped his forehead. The captain has fainted, he whispered to the man next to him. The co-pilot is alone up there now. That news spread like wildfire through the cabin. The co-pilot was trying to fly the plane and handle everything else alone. Aaliyah imagined how hard that must be, one person trying to do the work of two, with the whole plane depending on them. Suddenly, the co-pilot's voice crackled over the speaker. This time, he sounded different, frightened, and exhausted. Ladies and gentlemen, I need to ask if there's anyone on board with flight experience, or who has knowledge about aircraft controls. If so, please press your call button. No one went silent. No one moved at first. Some people looked around, hopefully waiting for a pilot or flight engineer to stand up, but nobody did. Aaliyah felt her heart beating even faster. She thought about everything her uncle had taught her, the names of the instruments, the way engines could fail and how pilots fixed problems step by step. She remembered helping him in his workshop, holding the flashlight while he explained each part of an old plane engine. She looked around unsure. She was just a teenager, just a passenger. But the co-pilot sounded desperate. She closed her eyes for a moment, thinking hard. Then she pressed her call button. Ms. Jenkins appeared almost immediately. Yes, Aaliyah. Aaliyah hesitated. I know about airplanes. My uncle is a mechanic. I've spent a lot of time learning how planes work. I know some things about the controls and the systems. Ms. Jenkins blinked in surprise. For a second, she seemed unsure, but there was no time to waste. Come with me, she said. Aaliyah stood up, her legs trembling. She heard people whispering as she walked up the aisle behind Ms. Jenkins. That's just a kid, someone muttered. Another voice said, let her try, she might know something. At the cockpit door, Ms. Jenkins knocked and gave the co-pilot Aaliyah's name. The co-pilot opened the door and looked at her, eyes wide with stress and fear. He was sweating and looked like he hadn't slept in days. I'm not a pilot, Aaliyah said quickly, but I know about instruments and checklists. My uncle taught me a lot about airplane mechanics. Maybe I can help. The co-pilot looked at her, then at Ms. Jenkins, and finally nodded. Come in, he said. I could use any help I can get. Aaliyah stepped inside the cockpit, saw panels of buttons and screens, some flashing warnings she'd seen before in her uncle's workshop manuals. The co-pilot explained that the left engine had lost power, and there was some kind of electrical fault causing the lights and alarms to misbehave. I need someone to help me check the emergency procedures, he said. Can you read through the manual for me while I keep the plane steady? Aaliyah nodded and picked up the thick emergency checklist. Her hands shook, but she remembered her uncle's advice: focus on the problem, not the fear. She started reading the steps out loud, checking the fuel pumps, switching to backup systems, resetting certain switches. The co-pilot worked quickly. Following her directions, she noticed a warning light for the landing gear that the co-pilot hadn't seen. There's a gear lever out of place, she pointed out, remembering her uncle's stories about how a loose lever could cause a system to fail. The co-pilot fixed it and thanked her. Together, they went through every emergency step, slowly bringing the situation under control. Back in the cabin, the passengers sat in anxious silence, waiting for any sign that things were getting better. Some began to pray, others just stared at the seat in front of them. Aaliyah could feel the tension in the cockpit, but she focused. On every instruction, every button, every light. She felt responsible, but also strangely calm. She realized she could really help. After about 15 minutes, the plane stopped shaking so much. The oxygen masks were no longer needed. Ms. Jenkins came back into the cockpit, her eyes full of hope. "People are scared," she whispered. The co-pilot took a deep breath. "Tell them we're working on it. And tell them a very smart passenger is helping us." Ms. Jenkins went back to the cabin and made the announcement. People started to whisper again, this time with something new in their voices. Hope. Aaliyah sat in the cockpit, feeling her nerves and her courage battling inside her. She wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was part of the team trying to save the day. Even though she was scared, she was determined to help, no matter what happened next. Aaliyah sat quietly in the cockpit, her heart pounding like never before. The co-pilot's hands were shaking on the controls, but he tried to smile at her. "Thank you for helping," he said softly, his voice full of worry and hope at the same time. The cockpit was smaller than she expected, with buttons everywhere, some blinking red, some green, some making quiet beeping sounds that seemed to fill the tiny room with tension. She took a deep breath and focused on the emergency checklist. In her hands, her uncle's voice echoed in her mind, reminding her to stay calm and think clearly. Every machine gives you clues. You just have to listen. Aaliyah listened to the airplane, to the co-pilot, and even to her own steady breathing. "Let's start from the top," she said, sounding more confident than she felt. "First, we check the fuel pumps, then the backup power." The co-pilot nodded and did as she said. They worked together, step by step, moving through the checklist slowly but carefully. Outside the cockpit, the plane's cabin was tense and quiet. Passengers whispered and waited. Some prayed quietly, and others just stared ahead, lost in their fears. Ms. Jenkins walked up and down the aisle, trying to comfort everyone, telling them help was on the way. When anyone asked about the cockpit, she simply smiled and said, "There's a very smart passenger in there helping the crew." Aaliyah and the co-pilot finished the first checklist. Some warning lights stopped flashing, but others still blinked urgently. The co-pilot explained that the main problem was the left engine had failed, and now they were flying with just one working engine. That meant less power and more risk, especially during landing. The radio crackled with a message from air traffic control. "Flight 682. Do you copy? State your situation." The co-pilot answered quickly, his voice steady but urgent, describing the failure and explaining that the captain was unwell. The controller sounded surprised to hear about the captain but stayed professional. "You need to prepare for an emergency." "Landing at the nearest airport," the controller said. "Can you manage the controls alone?" "I have some help," the co-pilot replied, glancing at Aaliyah with a grateful smile. The next step was to check the systems one by one. Aaliyah moved her fingers across the manual, reading each step. Out loud, the co-pilot worked quickly, pressing buttons, flipping switches, and checking gauges. She pointed to one control, noticing it was set to the wrong position. "I think this should be on auxiliary," she said, remembering her uncle's lessons about backup power. The co-pilot changed the setting, and the main display lit up brighter. Slowly, things seemed to get better. The warning sounds grew, less frequent. The plane still felt different, lower and heavier in the air, but there was a sense of hope building in the cockpit. The co-pilot turned to Aaliyah. "We have one shot at this. We need to land at Midway Airport. I need you to watch these dials and let me know if anything changes. Can you do that?" Aaliyah nodded, her hands steady now. Watch the dials carefully, remembering the hours spent in her uncle's workshop. The questions she always asked, and the little games he played to test her knowledge. All those lessons felt like they were meant for this moment. The co-pilot radioed the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are preparing for an emergency landing. Please listen to the crew and remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The voice was steady, and for the first time since the trouble began, passengers seemed to calm a little. Ms. Jenkins came into the cockpit for a quick update. The co-pilot said, We're doing our best, thanks to Alia here. She's helping me keep the systems running. Ms. Jenkins smiled at Alia, her eyes filled with pride and gratitude. Alia remembered something else her uncle taught her. If one engine fails, you need to watch the hydraulic systems, or you could lose control when landing, she told the co-pilot, who checked the hydraulic pressure. Good catch, he said, adjusting a valve that was showing a low reading. Minutes passed slowly. The plane began its descent. Outside, the city lights sparkled below, and the sky had turned a deep blue. Alia's hands didn't shake anymore. She felt focused, like she was solving a puzzle in real life. The radio came alive again. Flight 682, you are cleared for emergency landing. Runway 4 is ready. Emergency crews are standing by. The co-pilot repeated the instructions and told Alia, this is it. The next few minutes are the most important. The landing checklist was longer and even more important. Alia read each step out loud, making sure nothing was missed. The co-pilot set the flaps, checked the landing gear lever, and checked the brakes. Suddenly, the landing gear light started blinking, a sign that something wasn't right. Alia remembered one day in her uncle's workshop. He'd shown her how sometimes after a power failure, the landing gear lever needed to be reset by hand. She told the co-pilot about it, and together they found the manual override. The co-pilot pulled a hidden handle, and they heard a loud click. The landing gear locked into place. The light turned green. The co-pilot let out a sigh of relief. You're a lifesaver, Alia, he whispered. The plane was getting closer to the runway. Alia could feel the tension growing in the cockpit and all through the cabin. She imagined her parents and her grandma all waiting to hear she was safe. She imagined the faces of every passenger on the plane, and she knew she was helping them, and that gave her strength. As the runway lights appeared below, the co-pilot gripped the controls tighter. He talked to Alia, keeping her focused. Read me the checklist again. Let's make sure everything's set. Alia read the steps, one by one. Flaps, check. Brakes, check. Gear, check. Cabin secure. The plane shook as it came closer to the ground. People in the cabin held hands and prayed. Some cried quietly. Ms. Jenkins reassured them, telling them help was coming. Here we go, the co-pilot said, voice tense but calm. The wheels hit the runway with a thud. The plane bounced once, then settled. The co-pilot used all his strength to hold the controls steady as the plane slowed down. Alia watched the dials calling out numbers just like her uncle had taught her. The plane screeched, then finally came to a stop. For a moment, there was only silence. Then the sound of cheers, applause, and relieved sobs filled the cabin. The emergency vehicles rushed toward the plane, lights flashing. The co-pilot turned. To Alia, his eyes filled with gratitude. I couldn't have done it without you, he said softly. Alia felt tears in her eyes, but she was smiling too. She realized she had done something incredible, something she'd remember for the rest of her life. She wasn't just a passenger. She was a helper, a problem solver, and, in a way, a hero. As the emergency crew helped the passengers leave, the plane Ms. Jenkins came to Alia and gave her a huge hug. You saved us, she whispered. People were starting to talk in the cabin, did you hear? That young girl helped land the plane. She was just a passenger, but she saved us all. Alia watched the city lights outside and knew her life would never be the same. She had faced her fear, trusted what she knew, and helped others in a moment of true need. And as she left the cockpit, holding Miss Jenkins's hand, she looked back at the plane that she had helped save, her heart full of pride, hope, and dreams for the future. The plane was safely on the ground, but the tension inside was still very strong. Everyone was breathing hard from the rough landing, and the emergency crews were quickly moving toward the aircraft, ready to help. The passengers looked around at each other, faces showing relief, but also exhaustion and fear from the events that had just happened. Alia sat near the co-pilot, her hands still trembling slightly, but her spirit feeling strong. She realized how close they had come to disaster, and it made her heart beat faster again. But she also felt proud that she had stayed calm and used what she had learned to help save everyone on board. Ms. Jenkins was busy moving through the cabin, calming passengers and helping anyone who needed it. She stopped by Aaliyah and gave her a kind smile. "You did something amazing today," she said quietly, almost like a secret between them. Outside the plane, the bright lights of fire trucks, ambulances, and police cars made the runway look like a city of stars. The emergency teams were ready to assist the passengers in leaving the plane safely.
Wow.
Everyone had to stay seated for a moment longer while the crew checked the plane's condition and made sure there was no danger. The passengers talked in low voices, many sharing their stories about what they had felt and seen. The little girl who had cried before now clung tightly to her mother, still scared but comforted by the safety around her. The elderly man who had sat next to Aaliyah wiped tears from his eyes and smiled at her when their eyes met. "You were very brave, young lady," he said softly. News started spreading quickly. Someone in the cabin pulled out a phone and quietly recorded a message. "This young girl," the voice said, "helped the pilot land the plane when things went wrong. She saved our lives." Aaliyah didn't expect all the attention. She was still a teenager who just wanted to visit her grandma. But now, people were looking at her differently. She could see the surprise and admiration in their eyes. For the first time, she understood that what she did was more than just knowledge, it was courage. The emergency crews finished their safety checks and the passengers were told they could leave the plane. Slowly, everyone stood and began walking down the steps to the waiting buses. Aaliyah felt a tap on her shoulder and turned to see the co-pilot smiling. "Come with me," he said. He led her to a small room near the airport where some of the flight crew and airline officials were waiting. The co-pilot introduced Aaliyah and explained how she had helped him during the emergency. The officials listened carefully, their faces serious but respectful. One of the airline managers said, "Aaliyah, you showed remarkable presence of mind and bravery. You helped save this flight and the lives of everyone on board. We want to thank you and make sure you get recognized for your actions." Aaliyah felt shy but happy. She thought about her parents and how proud they would be. She also thought about her uncle, who had taught her to pay attention and never be afraid to help. Outside the room, reporters had gathered, waiting to hear the story. Aaliyah was gently asked if she would speak with them. With a deep breath, she agreed. The cameras flashed and the microphones were held close. "Can you tell us what happened?" one reporter asked kindly. Aaliyah looked down for a moment, then spoke softly but clearly. The plane had a problem with the engine. The captain wasn't feeling well, and the co-pilot was alone. "I tried to help by reading the emergency checklist and watching the controls. We worked together to land safely." The reporters nodded, impressed by her calm and honest words. "It's more." Questions came, but Aaliyah answered each one with courage. After the interviews, her parents arrived. They rushed to her, hugging her tightly, tears of relief and pride streaming down their faces. "We were so worried," her mother said, holding her close. "You were so brave, Aaliyah," her father smiled, wiping his eyes. "You saved lives today. You're our hero." Aaliyah felt warmth spread through her chest. She never thought she would be called a hero, but now she understood what it meant, not just the courage, but the responsibility to help others when it mattered most. The story quickly went viral online. People all over the country shared videos and articles about the young girl who helped land a plane in an emergency. Messages poured in from strangers, praising her bravery and intelligence. But not everyone believed the story at first. Some people questioned if a teenager could really help in such a serious situation. They asked for proof, doubted the passengers, and wondered if it was just luck. The airline released official statements confirming the events and praising Aaliyah's role. The co-pilot and flight attendants gave interviews supporting her story. Slowly, the doubts faded. Aaliyah tried to stay humble. She said she was just doing what she thought was right. "I didn't want anyone to get hurt," she told one reporter. "I just remembered what my uncle taught me and tried to stay calm." Days later, Aaliyah was invited to visit an aviation academy, where she was welcomed by pilots and engineers. They showed her new planes and told her stories of their own emergencies. They told her she had a bright future ahead if she wanted to work in aviation. The academy offered her a scholarship, which made her and her family very happy. It was a chance to turn her experience into something bigger, to learn more, to help more people. Back at home, Aaliyah kept thinking about the flight. She often replayed the moments when fear had tried to take over, but she had chosen to be brave instead. She thought about the passengers who had trusted her, the co-pilot who had believed in her, and the family waiting at the airport. She knew she had changed that day, not just in the sky, but in her own life. She realized that sometimes ordinary people find themselves in extraordinary situations. And when they do, they have a choice: to be scared or to be strong. Aaliyah had chosen strength, and that choice had saved lives. Her story inspired many others, especially young girls and boys who dreamed of flying or working with machines. They saw that courage and knowledge could come from anyone, no matter their age or where they came from. For Aaliyah, the journey was just beginning. She was no longer just a passenger on a plane. She was someone who had taken control when it mattered most. And she knew that no matter what challenges came next, she could face them with the same calm and bravery she had shown on that unforgettable flight. Asked ChatGPT. After the emergency landing, life around Aaliyah changed in ways she'd never expected. The story of the young girl who helped land a plane spread like wildfire. Reporters called her a hero, neighbors praised her, and strangers sent messages filled with admiration. Despite all the attention, Aaliyah stayed humble, quietly proud of what she had done, but always remembering she was just doing what anyone should do in a crisis. Her parents were her biggest supporters. They kept telling her how brave she was, and they celebrated with family and friends. Her mother often said, "You showed us all what courage really means." Her father promised to always stand by her, proud of the strong young woman she was becoming. Schools invited Aaliyah to speak to students about her experience. She talked about the importance of staying calm in emergencies, paying attention to safety instructions, and never being afraid to help when needed. Many students listened closely, inspired by someone their own age who had made such a difference. Aaliyah's uncle was especially proud. He told her, "You did exactly what I always hoped you would: use your knowledge and heart together. That's what true courage looks like." He helped her prepare for interviews and encouraged her to keep learning about airplanes and engineering. Aaliyah's story caught the attention of an aviation academy, which offered her a full scholarship. This was her chance to follow a dream she hadn't dared to say out loud before. At the academy, she met pilots, engineers, and other students who shared her passion. She studied hard, eager to learn everything about flying and aircraft mechanics. Even as her life changed, Aaliyah never forgot the people on that plane, the passengers who had trusted her, the flight crew who had supported her, and the emergency teams who had rushed to help. She stayed in touch with Ms. Jenkins and the co-pilot, who became like family to her. People often asked Aaliyah if she was scared during the flight. She always answered honestly, "Yes, I was scared. But I knew that if I stayed calm and used what I knew, I could help. Fear can stop you or push you. I chose to let it push me." The story also sparked conversations about young people's abilities and the importance of education. Many talked about how Aaliyah's quick thinking showed that courage and knowledge don't depend on age, gender, or background. She became a symbol of hope and strength for many communities. Aaliyah's life wasn't always easy. The attention sometimes felt overwhelming. She missed the quiet moments before the flight when everything was simple and calm. But she knew that what she had done had changed lives, including her own. One day, as she looked out over the runway during a visit to the airport, she thought about the future. She dreamed of becoming a pilot, or maybe an engineer who could design safer planes. She wanted to help others like she had helped on that flight. Her grandmother's warm kitchen, with the smell of cinnamon and bread, still waited for her visits. But now, Aaliyah carried something special with her: a story of bravery, a heart full of hope, and a spirit ready for whatever came next. Her story reminded everyone that sometimes the most ordinary people can become heroes when they choose to act. Aaliyah was no longer just a passenger on a plane. She was a young woman who had faced fear, taken control, and saved lives. And that was a story worth telling for many years to come.